Okay. Well, thanks for coming, guys, and thanks for coming up to the front of the room because we don't have a microphone here, so I hope you can hear me down the back there. I just wanted to point out that this little damp patch down here is absolutely nothing to do with me. It was here when I arrived. Okay, so I'm going to talk about creating and viewing resources using the clinFHIR tooling. And this is a combination of real-life demo, which is enormously stressful for those of you who've ever done one of these things. This is the time the whole thing is going to crash and burn, and a presentation. Very happy to take comments, questions throughout the presentation as we go. Okay, so clinFHIR. So clinFHIR is a tool that we started developing a couple of years ago. It's a web-based tool. We developed it as part of the Clinicians on FHIR events at the HL7 working group meetings. And it was really designed to help people interact with FHIR resources using a web-based tool. So it's a developer learning educational tool rather than a toolkit as the Happy Library was just being done. It allows you to do a number of things. It allows you to view the resources that are for a patient on any FHIR server. It lets you create resource instances from profiles. And they can be a base type or a pros type, a profile type. You can create simple profiles. You can look at the various errors and problems that you have, review activity, and create a logical model. So I'm going to go through the viewing of resources and the creating of new resources in this particular presentation. I am going to point out, if I don't already, and I will right now, clinFHIR is very much a work in progress. There are no guarantees with clinFHIR, unfortunately. It's a bit of software. As I said before, it's like any software does, if something can go wrong, that it actually will. Nevertheless, it's available for you to use, and we encourage you to use it. To get there, that is the URL. So it's a standard URL out there on the old internet. And I think, hopefully you can see that there. So that's clinFHIR. That's what the front page. We'll talk about that in just a second. So to start it, just go on there. Incidentally, if a number of people are kind of around the world do use this tooling in presentations because it does kind of help make it user-friendly. If you want to do it for that purpose, you are very welcome to do so. If you are planning on doing it, then let me know, and I'll do my very best not to break it between then and your actual event. I do update it quite frequently, and as I say, breakages are not unknown. This is one of the core concepts that you need to have. Now, I guess show of hands, who here is new to FHIR? And who would regard themselves as a clinician/BA rather than a techie type? Okay, only a couple, right, got a few techies. Oh, that's cool, that's fine. So clinFHIR has got the concept of types of servers. clinFHIR web application, it talks directly to a FHIR server on the internet, and we'll see how it does that page in just a second. And it has the concept of 3 different types of server. The first one is where the patient and the data sit. We'll call that the patient data server. The second is where the profiles and all of the other conformance resources that are part of FHIR sit. And the third one is the terminology. Now, it's a slightly advanced topic as to what those things actually mean, so we don't have to concern ourselves too much with it now. But the point of bringing it up is that when you go into clinFHIR, what you have to do is you have to select which servers you want to talk to. And you do so from this interface here. So, in fact, let's just go into the tooling. So I'm going to go across here. Oops. That's it there. So from here, I'm just going to restart just to show you there's nothing up my sleeve. Okay, so here are those 3 servers: the data server, the conformance server, and the terminology server. And this drop down here will list a number of servers that you can actually use. If my preference, and what I would recommend you doing when you're starting out, is use the public Happy STU3 server for both the data and the conformance, and then Graham's server as the terminology. You can choose different ones if you want to. There's nothing wrong with that. You're able to add your own servers to it if you wish to do so. But those are the ones which are most likely to give you good results. If you think you've got a problem, you can use this little test button here, and what that does is that actually reads what we call a conformance resource off the server. It's a way of testing that the server is actually there and operating. And again, I put that in because at various times errors occurred. This is the internet. Servers do go down, so that's a useful way of finding out that things are working. One thing I should point out, particularly for anybody who might have been in James's presentation before, that the Happy project have actually created a fully featured FHIR server that you can download and use as one file. It is supremely cool. If you're doing development, I actually strongly urge you to do it. And for example, that's what this local server actually is. I can have a full FHIR server running on my machine, which is exactly the same as that public one, exactly the same as commercial operations are using to develop real software, for free, running on your machine. So that's there as an option if you wish to use that. I'm going to go to there, so I've selected my servers. I'll go back to the presentation. When you do select your servers, it's really important to make sure you use the same STU version throughout. The tooling should be able to support STU2 and STU3. We're really on the cutting edge with this tooling because those versions do change from underneath, so that can cause a lot of fun. But make sure that you do. If you select a different version, it will complain. So you will get a warning, and as I say, weird stuff will happen. So again, I'm going to go back to my standard ones, which are most likely to work. And here we go, right. So that's what the front page will look like. There's a menu across to there. That lets you do other things. I'm not going to really talk about that stuff in this session. And the one tomorrow we start talking about profiling. That's where some of this stuff will come in more useful. But just to let you know that it's there. There are a few useful things down here. This access statistics tells you, who's using it and where, and you can actually see spikes of activity here at the various working group meetings. Again, it's just a fun kind of thing. That front button there, if you do go off and do different things, the front button will take you back to that front page. Technically speaking, this is a single page application based on Angular 1. It's quite safe to frequently restart the app, and if funny things happen, that's often a good thing to do. Okay, there is a login option at the top right-hand corner of the screen. That's this guy up through there. You can log in or log out. The only thing we use the login for is for tracking who's doing what. It's not for spamming. Don't sell it or anything like that. You don't have to use it if you don't want to. Some of the more advanced functions, particularly profiling and such like, require you to log in. All you've got to do is supply an email and a password, and that's it. And as I say, the only reason we put that in is to help people who are having troubles. They can say, I created a resource and it didn't work, and we can go to the logs and find out what it is. That's all it does. As I say, absolute promise. You heard it here. I will not spam. That's that there. Right. Viewing resources. How to view a resource in clinFHIR. The first thing you have to do is to select a patient to view the resources from. And you do that, I'm going to come back to here, using this link right up there that says select patient. And if I select there, I can go in and I can search on a couple of different parameters, but the easiest one is on name. Type in name there. I have no idea if I've got the eaves. I do have a couple of eaves in there that comes up. I select the one that I want, like so, and I have now selected that patient. And you'll see the patient name appears at the top here, and also appears in this little drop down through here. So it remembers the past few patients that you're looking at, and that's kind of handy if you're going into and out of a patient. It means you can go back to and see without having to reselect it every time. That's selecting a patient. You can also create a new patient from that same page. And to do that, you click on the select patient option there, and just click the button down the bottom there that says add new patient. Like so. What it does is it goes away, it makes up some names for you. There's actually a service out there on the internet that I call. You have this option here saying generate samples. Now, most of the time, if you're using this to kind of learn how FHIR actually works, it's useful to do that. You can unselect it if you want to. I'm going to select it there. So this is going to create a patient called Alexander King, age 35. I click on the button, and there it is. It's going through some counters, it's adding some conditions, added them, some observations, created the medication list, some appointments, added allergy list, and done. So what that process has done is that has gone to the data server that we created, that we selected rather, and it's created all of these resources as sample resources ready to go. Again, useful if you want to have a look and see how FHIR works, and I'll tell you for why in just a second. Okay, so that's adding a new patient. What we'll now do is we'll go in and we'll have a look at those resources that we have created. And there are a number of different views. I'm going to go right into the actual app itself. I'm going to close that down. So, to go in and see patient's data, you click on the details link right there. And that takes you to that screen there. So this lists the different types that have been created either by that automated process or ones that you have created. And I'll show you how we do that in just a little while. You can see the number of resources that exist. So for example, for the list resource, there are 3 examples of lists. If I click on that, I see those lists. Those got a medication list, an allergies list, a problems list. Let's click on one of those, the medications list. And I now come up with the details of the resource. We're now starting to get into the guts of FHIR. So what we've got here is we have the JSON representation of an actual FHIR list. This is what it looks like in JSON. I can look at it in XML if I want to as well. It's exactly the same thing. What's happening behind the scenes as I do these things is the tooling is making queries, FHIR queries against a FHIR server. If you really want to, you could go into, where am I trying to go to? View, developer, JavaScript console, network, and as I do stuff, I will see this. I'll leave that running so we'll see the various queries as they come up. Again, coming back to the purpose of clinFHIR is as an educational tool, is to help you help you understand how things actually work. Let's drop that down there to get it out of the way. So that's looking at an individual resource. We can look at it in a number of different ways. So this was the XML, but you can also look at it in a sort of tree structure. There's that guy there. So again, that's the same resource. We're just looking at it in a slightly different way. We can see the various entries that are down through there. We can look at the various references that it's got. So what this is now doing is, I don't know if you guys were in my talk this morning, but I was talking about how you have references between resources to tell a clinical story. This is the same thing being viewed graphically. So what's happening is that it's going out, it's got the list, and it's resolving the various references. So this is a medication list. The medication list has got a reference to a number of medication statements, and it's got a reference to the patient itself. So this kind of helps show the interrelationships that you can have. And you can move around in here. I can select that medication statement there, for example. That puts it into context and shows the references that it has got, which in this case is a reference from the list to the medication statement and from the medication statement to the patient. So that's kind of looking to see what resources are in there. We've got a number of other ways we can look at it. This tab here shows all the resources on file for this patient. So again, here is you can zoom it and move it around and do that kind of stuff as well. So that's showing the problem list resource. And again, showing references to condition resources in this case. And again, I can select them and have a look at the details in here. Being a web tool really works in JSON. If you're going to get involved in this sort of stuff, it's worth learning JSON if you don't already know. It's not hard. You can sort of see how, it's kind of name-ish, value-ish kind of, but you can see, the resource type there, the clinical status, and so on and so forth. So that's worth understanding how the bits work together. And the encounter timeline is just a kind of fun-looking view, which shows the various encounters that are in there and the references to those encounters. Any questions on any of that stuff? Okay, so... Sorry.
When you generate this sort of sample data, does it always populate the resources with the same values, or do you have some form of random algorithm?
Mostly the same values here. The purpose was to create some stuff to start with that people can actually work from. There are actually a number of tools out there that have got more realistic data. So I haven't tried this for a while, but we'll try again. If I go to here and I drop this down and go to my HIN server there, that's STU2. So I'll I'll change that to STU2 so it stops complaining. And let's select a patient off there. So this is an example where I'm now pointing at, okay. I'm so predictable, but it's not helping me at all, is it? Okay, so this isn't going to work. Basically, you can use the tooling, I give up. You can use the tooling for, and incidentally, we talked about, so you can see down here, so these are the actual queries there, so, boy, you can hardly see that, can you? So that's the kind of query that's making against that server. Let's just drop that down. And in truth, I probably won't do much more in terms of creating sample resources, but that's what's there. Okay, so we talked about that. We talked about the individual representations, all resources. We talked about that. Encounter timeline. Creating a resource. Okay, how to create a resource. Oops, go back to here. So the first thing you need to do when you're creating a resource instance is to select the profile that you want to use for your resource instance. And I'm using the word profile kind of generically here because this can either be a base profile that comes out of the spec or a profile that has been created. Now, profiling can get really complicated underneath the hood. So clinFHIR at the moment does choke on some of the more complex profiles, handles the simple ones. So most of the time, when I'm doing demonstrations, I'll start with the basic stuff. So you select your profile, you select your template if you like, then you'll get a builder screen like this one here. Let's show you how that works. I go back to the tool, I select my servers, the public happy 3 server there, public happy 3 server there. Notice how it automatically selects the correct terminology server. You can overwrite that if you want to, but by default it will do that. I select my patient. I could go in and I could view the existing data for that patient, but I won't right now. Now I want to select a profile or base type. I'll do that from this screen here. And that lets me select a number of things. If I drop that down, I can select these are the known profiles from the specification. So let's choose something, let's choose care plan to be different, like so. I can now do one of two things. I can now ask for the care plan resource itself, or the care plan profile, or I could ask for profiles on care plan. When you create a profile, what you do is you indicate what is the base type that you are profiling on. So I'm pretty sure there won't be any here, but if I just select this button, okay, found 2. And if I click on that tab there, so that's one profile that someone has created. And as you see, they haven't done it completely. And then there's another one there, like so. So these are actually profiles. I'm not going to go into that little stuff in this session. We'll do so tomorrow if you're interested. Most of the time, your safest bet is just to directly select the resource type you are interested in there, like so. And okay, there we go. That's got that there. So that brings up the care plan. So I've now selected a care plan. I've also got the condition which I had selected before. I'll go back to the presentation and then go into the builder screen. So to go into the builder screen, I select the patient, which I've got. I'll go for condition for the moment now. Click on that button at the top there to create a new resource instance. This is the builder screen. I'll just drop that down through here. So this is where you enter your actual data items that you want to enter for your resource. Now, I mentioned in the talk this morning that one of the nice things about the way FHIR works is that because everything's computable, it's possible to write interfaces that work directly off those computable artifacts, which is exactly what clinFHIR is doing. So what's happened here is the tooling has gone away, downloaded the structure definition resource which defines what a condition looks like, and it's used that to build this interface. If I was to select a different resource, so if I close that down and I select a care plan resource instead, I get a different set of values in there. So it's completely dynamic. I am going to go back to the condition resource though, there. So over to the left-hand side there, you have like a navigator, which lets you navigate around the resource as you build it. These are all the child elements, which are the children of the currently selected route. And you can kind of see those. If we go sideways a little bit and we go and look at the specification itself. So there's the spec. Let's go into resources. Let's find condition, which is there. So in effect what it's doing is I've selected condition, so it's it's viewing in that center list all these ones here that were in the middle, as opposed to stage and evidence. If we go back into clinFHIR, what we will see is we see all of those guys down through there, and there's stage and evidence. They are things called backbone elements. They've got their own children. So if I click on that, I get a difference, and I now get the children of stage in this case, which is not what I want. So I'll go back to the top level. So I now go back and I now see the children of the top one. Here's the resource that I'm building. So by default, it's created some basic stuff for you. It's created the metadata, so that tells you the profile that it's claiming conformance to. As I said this morning, a resource instance can claim to be conformant to a profile. It is just a claim. You can't trust it. There are ways of testing that sort of stuff. That's how the resource can claim that. And you can see how it's already added the subject in there for you, because I knew who the patient was, so it was able to work that out. And you can actually see the subject is a reference to that patient, so that's a logical reference. So it says it's a reference to the patient whose ID is 198476. To add information, you go into this middle bit here and you click on the data type alongside the element that you want to add. The reason why we do it that way is because, as you can see, a single element can have different data types. It's called polymorphism, or choice data types. And you'll see that in the spec. I'll just touch on that very quickly. You see that in the spec by here. You see that little X thing there. That X tells you that you can have different data types for the same element. That traps people up to start out with. So I'm going to go to this verification status. I'm going to click on that. Now what's happened here is that the verification status is actually a coded element. So it's bound to a value set from there to a terminology. What's happened is the tooling has gone out, it's gone to the profile told it what the binding was, the binding told it what the value set was, it could go out and read the value set, having got the value set, it could then ask the terminology server for all of the possible values, and it then created those as radio buttons. So that's kind of what's happened behind the scenes. And indeed, if we were to go into the view, you'll see that occurring down through. There's where it read the value set there, based on the URL. Down there is where it called the expand operation on the terminology server and so forth. So it's a good example of how you can start to use some of the functionality that FHIR defines. I'll just drop that down there for a second. So I select one of those guys, like engineer, save element, and there it is. It's added it to the resource down through there. I can select the code. This is now what's happening here is that it's done the same thing as it did before, but in this case the value set's quite large, so it hasn't. I mean, there's tens of thousands of possible values. So rather than display them all as a humongous radio button, it does an auto-populate. So if I type in something like, what can I type in? Diabetes. Oops, DIB. Okay, I'll type. Oh, there you go. So I had no idea that DIB actually existed. So what it's gone away, it's used another terminology operation. This is actually the expand with a filter on it. And it's got these set of things. So there's a, whatever the heck, dibasic, whatever that one is. So I've now selected that as a condition. What's kind of fun is that if you're using something like SNOMED, which a lot of these are, it's actually possible to go up and down the hierarchy. So I can see, for example, that that's a lysiniuric acid protein intolerance thing, and I can select that as well. So however you do it, you go through and you wind up selecting your element, and there it is, and the thing down through there. So you basically go through the various elements that you want to create, add the values that you want to add. When you're done, you click the Save Resource, like so. comes up with a confirmation message to say, do you really want to save this resource? Click on the save button. It's always a slightly nervy moment when that particular time, but it's now come back, it's now saved that condition. So what we've done is we have created a condition resource for this patient and effectively added it to their notes. And if I close that down, and I go back into the details here, like so, on the details button, and go to the Resource Explorer tab through here, click on Conditions there it is down through there. So that's the resource which we have just created. And you can view that resource in the same way as any other. That's looking at the references, which are just reference to a patient. I can look at the JSON resource. What I can also do from here is I can edit the resource. So behind the scenes, what we did is we used the post operation to create a new resource. I can now use a put operation to edit it. So to do that, I click on the Edit Resource option here. That brings that resource back into the editor. And I can now change, say, the verification status from, what is it now, entered an error, to confirmed. And save that. And that's now an update option there. Click on the update. That's now been updated. Notice it's now come back as version 2. So FHIR has built into it the concept of versioning of a resource. A server does not have to support versioning, but if it does, there's a well-defined API for doing that. So this has now saved this as a different version. And if I go back into here and go back into my details tab and find my protein, I now have 2 versions of that same resource, and I can flick backwards and forwards between those 2 versions. So this version 2 is the one that I've got, and you can see it's got the verification status of confirmed. Option 1 is now entered an error like so. That shows how you can create a resource and then edit it. And you can view it in exactly the same way as any of the others. You can look at the tree view, there's your XML view, and so on and so forth. So that's how to create resources using the clinFHIR tooling and how to view them before and or after. And as I say, the purpose of this is just to help people understand what FHIR is. This is not a production tool, but it's a useful way, what we found in practice, a useful way for people to understand how the whole thing hangs together. Enter encoded value, I talked about that, moving down the hierarchy, talked about that, saving the resource. Parking. Parking is where you can, one thing I didn't show actually, which is possibly worth showing, let's go back, let's edit that resource again. And some of these, one thing I didn't point out was subject type crops. That's not context. So there's an element here. So these elements here were all simple elements, like they were just a value. They could be a more complex data type. These ones are references to other resources. So for example, this one here, the context. If we go and look at the condition here, and we see it's got this context there. So the context is a reference either to an encounter or to an episode of care. If we go back into here, we'll see we've got either encounter or episode of care. If we click on the encounter resource, what we do is we now get a list of all of the encounters that exist for this patient. We can select one of those encounters, select the one on 14, save that. And so I've now got this context added. Take that. So we've now got the 3rd version of this. So now when we go and view that, like so, there it is down through there. We now have 3 versions. With a bit of luck, I go to that one. Yeah, there we go. So we now see that in this 3rd version, there is now a reference to an encounter as well as to a patient, whereas the 2nd version had only the reference to the patient. The parking functionality allows you to temporarily save a resource that you are creating. And you might do that if you create a resource and then you realise you want to create a reference to something that you haven't already created. So you can park the one that you are in the middle of creating, create the dependent one, save it, come back and relink it. So parking, local activity is just a way of seeing what you've actually done in the app so far. So if I go back to my front page here and go to here, we can see there. So these are the resources as I am creating them. That's the one that I've just done through there. There's the second version of it, and so on and so forth. So it's just another way of looking to see what I'm doing. This is kind of useful if you're doing something, things aren't kind of working the way you expect that they're working. Here's a way to go back in and see what you really did. Activity, it's going through there, showed that. Failure log when there's errors. Okay, gotchas. So as I say, this is very much a work in progress. This is a tooling that I'm suggesting we could use as part of the clinician stream this afternoon. Where it's on that stream, we can talk about what we want to do, but this is one of the possibilities. There's a work in progress. Some of the things that we have come across, sometimes that navigator node can have 2 nodes selected, so just pick the one you want. I've noticed sometimes duplicates, doesn't seem to cause any damage, so just ignore them. If you get an endless spinner, you're toast, sorry. Doesn't happen so much these days, but in the early days, quite often it would completely hang itself. And if weird stuff happens, those are the three stages you can try. I suggest you try them in that order, and hopefully we can resolve it. So that's really all I had to show. I'm certainly happy to take any further questions that there may be. All right, I've given you back 7 minutes of time, so thanks for coming along, and hopefully we'll see some of you on the clinical track this afternoon.